join with me to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of the Shinanemo people. We honor, respect, love everything they've provided for us, and we continue to respect, love, and honor this land. With that, we say Hachka. So welcome, everyone. Fabulous evening ahead of us. This is a fundraising event, so thank you in advance that we welcome donations there's a box here, there will be one in the refreshment area, and also e-transfers are always welcome. That can be done at donations@unityvancouverisland.com. So today we're going to have a reading of the Christmas story. It consists of 5 parts or staves, which is going to be read by Sharron Macleod, Brian Hazelbower, Joanne Rowland, Patricia Zogar, and Michael Robinson. Thank you for stepping up to do that.
A Christmas Carol, radio play by Charles Dickens. Marley was dead, to begin with. There was no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead. Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend, his sole mourner. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name, however. There it yet stood, years afterwards, above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge, and sometimes Marley. He answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted, hand at the grindstone was Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No man or woman once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind man's dog appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming, would tuck their owners into doorways and up courts, and then would wag their tails as though they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, upon a Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house, a grim, cheerless place if ever there was one. It was cold, bleak, biting, foggy weather, and the city clocks had only just turned 3, but it was quite dark already. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal. Wherefore the clerk put on his white scarf and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation Scrooge had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" "Christmas a humbug, Uncle. You don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do. Out upon Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer? A time for balancing your books and having every item in them presented dead against you. If I had my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his hearts. He should. Uncle! Nephew, keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep it in mine. Keep it, but you don't keep it. Let me leave it alone, then. Much good may it do you. Much good it has ever done you. There are many times from which I have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say. I have always thought of Christmas time as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in the long calendar of the year, when men and women seem to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people beyond them, as if they really were fellow travelers to the grave. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good, and will do me good, and I say, God bless it. The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded. Let me hear another sound from you, said Scrooge, and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow. Scrooge said that he would see him in hell first. But why? Cried Scrooge's nephew. Good afternoon. I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends? Good afternoon. I am sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute, but I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So a Merry Christmas, Uncle. Good afternoon. And a Happy New Year. Good afternoon. The clerk, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands and bowed to him. At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, said one gentleman, taking up a pen, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provisions for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at this present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessities, hundreds of thousands in want of common comforts, sir. Are there no prisons? Plenty of prisons, but under the impression that they scarcely furnish cheer of mind or body to the unoffending multitude, a few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. Oh, what shall I put you down for? Nothing. You wish to be anonymous? I wish to be left alone. Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the prisons and the workhouses. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there. Many can't go there, and many would rather die. If they would rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. Good afternoon, gentlemen. At length the hour of shutting up the counting-house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge, dismounting from his stool, tacitly admitted the fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed out his candle and put on his hat. You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose? If quite convenient, sir. It's not convenient, and it's not fair. If I was to stop half a crown of your wages for it, you'd think yourself mightily ill-used, I'll be bound. It's only once a year, sir. A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning. The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white scarf dangling below his waist, for he boasted no great coat, went down a slide 20 times in honor of it being Christmas Eve, and then ran home as hard as he could pelt to play at blind man's bluff with his family.
Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms. The building was old enough now and dreary enough, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge, the other rooms being all let out as offices. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door of this house, except that it was very large. Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in that place. And yet Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face, with a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not ferocious or angry, but it looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with the ghostly spectacles turned up upon his ghostly forehead. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. He said, "Pooh, pooh," and closed the door with a bang. The sound resounded through the house like thunder. Every room above and every cask in the wine merchant's cellar below appeared to have a separate peal of echoes upon it. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door, walked up the stairs, trimming his candle as he went. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for it being very dark. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through the rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa, a small fire in the grate, spoon and basin ready, and a little saucepan of gruel. Now nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet, nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Quite satisfied, he closed his door and locked himself in, double locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers, and his nightcap, and sat down before a very low fire to take his gruel. As he threw his head back in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell, that hung in the room and communicated for some purpose now forgotten with the chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment and with a strange, inexplicable dread that he looked and he saw this bell begin to swing. Soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. Thus was succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. It came on through the heavy door. A spectre passed into the room before his eyes, and upon its coming in, the dying flame leapt up as though it cried, "I know him, Marley's ghost." The same face, the very same. Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tightened boots. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the two buttons on his own coat behind. Scrooge had often heard that Marley had no bowels, but had never believed it until now. Though he looked the phantom through and through and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of the death-cold eyes and noticed the very texture of the folded kerchief bound about his head and chin, he was still incredulous. "How now?" said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. "What do you want with me?" "Much." Marley's voice, no doubt about it. "Who are you?" "Ask me who I was." "Who were you then?" "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley." Can you sit down?" "I can." "Do it then." Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair. But the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it. "You don't believe me?" "I don't." "What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses?" "I don't know." "Why do you doubt your senses?" "Because a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You might be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are." Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel in his heart any means waggish then. The truth is, he tried to be smart, as a means of distracting his own attention and keeping his horror down. But much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off the bandage round its head, as if it were too warm to wear indoors, its lower jaw dropped upon its breast. "Mercy! Dreadful apparition! Why do you trouble me? Why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?" "It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. I cannot tell you all I would. A very little more is permitted to me. I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me, in life my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me." 7 years dead, and traveling all that time? You travel fast? "On the wings of the wind. You might have got over a great quantity of ground in 7 years. Oh, blind man, not to know that ages of incessant labor by immortal creatures, for this earth must pass into eternity before the good of which is susceptible is all developed. Not to know that any spirit working kindly in this little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness. Not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one's life's opportunities missed. Yet I was like this man. I once was like this man." "But you were always a good man of business, Jacob," faltered Scrooge, who now beginning to apply this to himself. "Business. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business." It held up its chain at arm's length, as if it were the cause of its unavailing grief, and flung it heavily upon the ground again. "At this time of the rolling year, I suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down? Were there no poor homes to which its light would have conducted me?" Scrooge was very much dismayed to hear his spectre go on at this rate, and began to quake exceedingly. "Hear me. My time is nearly gone." "I will, but don't be hard upon me. Don't be flowery, Jacob, pray." "I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate. A chance and hope of my procuring, Ebenezer." "You are always a good friend to me, thank ye." "You will be haunted by 3 spirits. Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob? I think I'd rather not. "Without their visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tonight, when the bell tolls one. Look to see me no more, and look that, for your own sake, you remember what has passed between us." It walked backward from him, and every step it took, the window raised itself just a little, so that when the apparition reached it, it was wide open, and it floated out through the self-opening window into the bleak, dark night. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double-locked, as he had locked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. Scrooge tried to say "humbug," but was stopped at the first syllable. At being from the emotion he had undergone, or the fatigues of the day, or the glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose, he went straight to bed, without undressing, and fell asleep upon the instant.
When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that looking out of bed, he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber, until suddenly the church clock told a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy one. Light flashed up in the room upon an instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn by a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as an old man, viewed through some supernatural medium which gave him the appearance of receding from the view, and being diminished to a child's proportions. Its hair was white as if with age, yet the face had not a wrinkle on it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and in singular contradiction of that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. But the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprung a clear jet of light by which all of this was visible. "Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?" "I am." Who and what are you?" "I am the ghost of Christmas past." "Long past?" "No, your past. The things that you will see with me are shadows of the things that have been. They will have no consciousness of us. Rise and walk with me." The grasp, though as gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the spirit made towards the window, clasped its robe in supplication. I am mortal. I will fall." "Bear but a touch of my hand there," said the spirit, laying it upon his heart, "and you shall be upheld in more than this." As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood in the busy thoroughfare of a city. A ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it. "Know it? Why, I was apprenticed here." They went in. At the sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig sitting behind such a high desk that if it had been 2 inches taller, he must have knocked his head against the ceiling, Scrooge cried out in great excitement, "Why, it's old Fezziwig! Bless his heart, it's Fezziwig, alive again!" Old Fezziwig laid down his pen, looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, laughed all over himself from his shoes to his organ of benevolence, and called out in a comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice, "Yo-ho there, Ebenezer, Dick." A living and moving picture of Scrooge's former self, a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow prentice. "Oh, Dick Williams, to be sure," said Scrooge to the ghost. My old fellow prentice." "Yo-ho, boys," said Fezziwig. "No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up before a man can say Jack Robinson. Clear away, my lads. Let's have lots of room here." Clear away. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off. The floor was swept, the lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse was as snug and warm and dry and bright as a ballroom you would ever desire to see upon a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book, went up to the lofty desk and made an orchestra of it and tuned like 50 stomach aches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile. In came 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came the 6 young followers, whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. In came the housemaid with her cousin, the baker. In came the cook with her brother's particular friend, the milkman. In they all came, one after the other, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling, and in they all came, anyhow and everyhow. And away they all went dancing, 20 couples at once, hands half round and back again, the other way, down the middle and up again, round and round, in various stages of affectionate grouping. When they were all done, old Fezziwig clapped his hands and cried out, "Well done!" And the fiddler plunged his face into a pot of porter especially provided for the purpose. There were more dances, and there were forfeits, and more dances, and there was cake, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was a great piece of cold boiled, and there were mince pies and plenty of beer. When the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations on either side of the door, and shaking hands with every person individually as she or he went out, and wished him or her a Merry Christmas. When everyone had retired, except the two prentices, they did the same to them, and thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were led to their bed, which were under the counter at the back of the shop. "A small matter," said the ghost, "to make these silly folks so full of gratitude. He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves such praise?" It isn't that," said Scrooge, heated by the remark, and speaking unconsciously like his former, not his latter self. It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks. The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune. He felt the spirit's glance and stopped. "What is the matter?" asked the spirit. "Nothing particular. Something, I think. No. I should like to be able to say a word to my clerk just now, that's all." "My time grows short," observed the spirit. "Quick!" This was not addressed to Scrooge or to anyone who he could see, but it produced an immediate effect. For again, he saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of life. He was not alone, but sat by the fair side of the fair young girl in a black dress, in whose eyes there were tears. "It matters little," she said softly to Scrooge's former self. "To you, very little. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can comfort you in the time to come, as I would have tried to, I have no just cause to grieve." "What idol has displaced you?" "A golden one. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion, gain, engrosses you, have I not?" "What then? Even if I have grown much wiser, what then? I am not changed towards you. Have I ever sought release from our engagement?" "In words, no. Never." "In what, then?" "In a changed nature, in an altered spirit, in another atmosphere of life, another hope as its great end. If you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, can I even believe that you would choose a dowerless girl, or choosing her, do I not know that your repentance and regret would surely follow? I do, and I release you with a full heart for the love of him you once were. Spirit, remove me from this place. I told you these were shadows of the things that have been, said the ghost. That they are what they are, do not blame me. Remove me, Scrooge exclaimed. I cannot bear it. Leave me. Take me back. Haunt me no longer. As he struggled with the spirit, he was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further, of being in his own bedroom. He had barely time to reel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep.
Scrooge awoke in his own bedroom. There was no doubt about that. But it and his sitting room, into which he shuffled in his slippers, attracted by a great light there, had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove. The leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there. And such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as that petrifaction of a hearth had ever known in Scrooge's time or Marley's. Heaped upon the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12th cakes, and great bowls of punch. In easy state upon this couch there sat a giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and who raised it high to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door. Come in, and know me better, man. I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me. You have never seen the like of me before. Never. Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learnt a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you ought to teach me, let me profit by it. Touch my robe. Scrooge did as he was told and held it fast. The room and its contents all vanished instantly, and they stood in the city streets upon a snowy Christmas morning. Scrooge and the ghost passed on, invisible, straight to Scrooge's clerks, and on the threshold of the door, the spirit smiled and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinklings of his torch. Think of that. Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, dressed out but poorly in a twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons, which are cheap and make a goodly show. And she laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes, and getting the corners of his monstrous shirt collar, Bob's private property conferred upon his son and heir in honor of the day, into his mouth. And now 2 smaller Cratchits came tearing in and danced about the table and exalted Master Peter Cratchit to the skies, while he, not proud, although his collars nearly choked him, blew the fire until the slow potatoes, bubbling up, knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled. "Whatever has got your precious father, then?" said Mrs. Cratchit, "and your brother Tiny Tim? And Martha weren't as late last Christmas Day by half an hour." "Here's Martha, mother," said a girl, appearing as she spoke. "Here's Martha." "Martha, well, bless your heart alive, my dear, how late you are," said Mrs. Cratchit, kissing her a dozen times and taking off her shawl and bonnet for her. "Sit you down before the fire, my dear, and have a warm. Lord bless you." "There's Father coming," cried the two young Cratchits, who were everywhere all at once. "Hide, Martha, hide." So Martha hid herself, and in came little Bob, the father, with at least 3 feet of scarf, exclusive of the fringe, hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch and had his limbs supported by an iron frame. "Why, where's our Martha?" cried Bob Cratchit, looking around. "Not coming," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Not coming," said Bob, with a sudden declension in his high spirits. "Not coming upon Christmas Day?" Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, even if it were only in joke, so she came out prematurely from behind the closet door and ran into his arms, while the two young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off into the wash-house that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper. "And how did little Tim behave?" asked Mrs. Cratchit, when Bob had hugged his daughter to his heart's content. "As good as gold," said Bob, "and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much and thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me coming home that he hoped the people saw him in the church because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see." His active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim to his stool beside the fire. Master Peter and the two ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy, ready beforehand in a little saucepan, hissing hot. Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigor. Miss Belinda sweetened up the applesauce. Martha dusted the hot plates. At last the dishes were set on, and grace was said. It was succeeded by a breathless pause as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it in the breast. But when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose all around the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the two young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handle of his knife and feebly cried, "Hurrah!" There never was such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there ever was such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavor, size, and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by the applesauce and mashed potatoes, it was sufficient dinner for the whole family. Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witnesses, to take the pudding up and bring it in. Suppose it should not be done enough. Suppose it should break in turning out. Suppose somebody should have got over the wall of the backyard and stolen it while they were merry with the goose. Hallo, a great deal of steam. The pudding was out of the copper. Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed but smiling proudly, with the pudding like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing in half a quartern of ignited brandy, holly stuck into the top. Then Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas to all, my dears, God bless us," which all the family re-echoed. "God bless us, everyone," said Tiny Tim, the last of all. He sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held his withered little hand in his as if he loved the child and wished to keep him by his side and dreaded that he might be taken from him. "Mr. Scrooge," said Bob, "I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." "The founder of the feast, indeed," cried Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. "I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I'd hope he'd have a good appetite for it." "My dear," said Bob, "the children, Christmas Day." "It should be Christmas Day, I am sure," said she, "on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge." "My dear," was Bob's mild reply, "Christmas Day." "I'll drink to his health for your sake and the day's," said Mrs. Cratchit, "not for his. Long life to him." They were not a handsome family. They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scanty. But they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. And when they faded and looked happier yet in the bright sprinkling of the Spirit's torch at parting, Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially on Tiny Tim, until the last. It was a great surprise to Scrooge, as this scene vanished, to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room with the spirit standing smiling by his side and looking at that same nephew. Scrooge's nephew laughed. Scrooge's niece by marriage laughed as heartily as he, and their assembled friends laughed out lustily. "He said that Christmas was a humbug, as I live," cried Scrooge's nephew. "He believed it too. He's a comical old fellow, that's the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offenses carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him." After tea, amid much merriment, they had some music and games. "Here is a new game," said Scrooge, "1 half-hour, Spirit, only one." It was a game called Yes and No, where Scrooge's nephew had to think of something, and the rest must find out what, he only answering to their questions yes and no, as the case was. The questions elicited from him that he was thinking of an animal, a live animal, a rather disagreeable animal, a savage animal, an animal that growled and grunted sometimes, and walked about, and lived in London, and wasn't made a show of, and wasn't led by anybody, and didn't live in a menagerie, and was not a horse, or an ass, or a cow, or a bull, or a tiger, or a dog, or a pig, or a cat, or a bear. At every new question put to him, this nephew burst into a fresh roar of laughter, and was so inexpressibly tickled that he was obliged to get up off the sofa and stamp. At last the plump sister cried out, "I have found it! I know what it is, Fred! I know what it is!" "What is it?" cried Fred. "It's your Uncle Scrooge!" Yes. Uncle Scrooge had imperceptibly become so gay and light of heart that he would have drank to the unconscious company in an inaudible speech. But the whole scene passed off in the breath of the last word spoken by his nephew, and he and his spirit were again upon their travels. Much they saw, and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The spirit stood beside sick beds, and they were cheerful, on foreign lands, and they were close at home, by struggling men, and they were patient in their greater hope, by poverty, and it was rich, in almshouse, hospital, and jail, in misery's every refuge where vain man in his little brief authority had not made fast the door and barred the spirit out. He left his blessing and taught Scrooge his precepts. Suddenly, as they stood together in an open place, the bells struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it no more.
Remembering the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes, Scrooge beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for in the air through which this spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. "I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come? Ghost of the future, I fear you more than any specter I have seen. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear you company and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?" It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them. Lead on, the night is waning fast, and is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, spirit." They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to spring up about them. The spirit stopped beside one little knot of businessmen. Observing that the hand was pointed at them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk. "Oh," said a great fat man with a monstrous chin, "I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead." What has he done with his money? Asked a red-faced gentleman. Oh, I haven't heard, said the man with the large chin. Company, perhaps. He hasn't left it to me, that's all I know. Bye-bye. Scrooge was at first inclined to be surprised that the spirit should attach importance to a conversation apparently so trivial. But feeling assured that it must have some hidden purpose, he set himself to consider what it was likely to be. It could scarcely be supposed to have any bearing on the death of old Jacob, his old partner, for that was past, and this ghost providence was the future. They left this busy scene and went into an obscure part of town, to a low shop where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were bought by a gray-haired rascal of great age who sat smoking his pipe. Scrooge and the Phantom came into the presence of this man, just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. But she had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black. Look here, old Joe, here's a chance if we haven't all three met here without meaning it, said the charwoman. Well, you couldn't have met in a better place. What have you got to sell? Well, half a minute's patience, Joe, and you shall see, said the woman. Every person has a right to take care of themselves. He always did. Who's the worse for a loss of a few things like these? Open that bundle, old Joe, and let me know the value of it. Joe went down on his knees for the greater convenience of opening the bundle and dragged out a large and heavy roll of some dark stuff. What do you call this? Bed curtains? Ah, bed curtains. Don't drop that oil upon the blankets now, said the woman. His blankets? Well, who else do you think? He isn't likely to take cold without him, I dare say. You may look through that shirt till your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole in it nor a threadbare place. It's the best he had, and a fine one, too. They'd have wasted it by dressing him up in it if it hadn't been for me, said the woman. Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror. Spirit, I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heavens, what is this? The scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bare, uncurtained bed. A pale light, rising in the outer air, fell straight upon this bed, and on it, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this plundered man unknown. Spirit, let me see some tenderness connected with the death, or this dark chamber spirit will forever be present to me. The ghost conducted him to poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and found the mother and the children seated round the fire. Quiet, very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner, and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and her daughters were engaged in needlework. The mother laid her work upon the table and put her hand to her face. The color hurts my eyes, she said. Oh, they're better now again. It makes them weak by candlelight, and I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home. Must be near his time. Past it, rather, Peter answered, shutting up his book. But I think he has walked a little slower than he used these last few evenings, Mother. I have known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed, but he was very light to carry, and his father loved him so that it was no trouble. And there is your father at the door. She hurried out to meet him, and little Bob, in his scarf, he had need of it, poor fellow, came in. His tea was ready for him on the hob, and they all tried who should help him to it most. Then the two young Cratchits got upon his knees and laid each child a little cheek against his face, as if they said, "Don't mind it, Father. Don't be grieved." Bob was very cheerful with them and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. "You went today, then, Robert?" "Yes, my dear," returned Bob. "I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is. But you'll see it often. I promised him that I would walk there on a Sunday. My little, little, little child. He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. "Spectre," said Scrooge, "something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. Tell me what that man was with the covered face whom we saw lying dead." A ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him to a dismal, wretched, ruinous churchyard. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. "Before I draw near to that stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of things that will be, or are they the shadows of things that may be only?" Still, the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. "Am I that man who lay upon the bed? No, spirit. Oh, no, no, spirit, hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been. Assure me that I yet may change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach me. Oh, tell me, I may sponge away the writing on this stone." And holding up his hands in one last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes, and the bedpost was his own, and the bed was his own, and the room was his own. And best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own to make amends in. Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist, no night. Clear, bright, stirring golden day. "What's today?" cried Scrooge, calling down to a boy in Sunday clothes. "What's today, my fine fellow?" "Today? Why, Christmas Day. Oh, it's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. Hello, my fine fellow. Do you know the poulterers in the next street? The one at the corner? Oh, I sure hope I did. Oh, an intelligent boy. A remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? Not the little prize turkey, the big one? What? The one as big as me was hanging there now. Go and buy it and tell them to bring it here. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's. He won't know who sends it. It's the size of Tiny Tim." Scrooge dressed himself in all his best and at last got out into the streets. In the afternoon, he turned his steps toward his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock. "Why, bless my soul," cried Fred, "who's that?" "It's I, your Uncle Scrooge. I have come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?" Let him in? It is a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. His niece looked just the same. So did everyone when they came. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness. He was early at the office the next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late, that was the thing he had set his heart upon. And he did it. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1:15, no Bob. Bob was a full 8 minutes and a half behind his time. Bob's hat was off before he opened the door. He stood on a stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overclock 9 o'clock. "Hello," cried Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as near as he could feign it. "What do you mean coming in here at this time of day?" "Oh, I'm very sorry, sir. I'm behind my time. It's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday." "Now, I'll tell you what, my friend. I am not going to stand this sort of thing any longer. And therefore," Scrooge continued, leaping from his stool, "and therefore, I'm about to raise your salary." Oh, "Merry Christmas, Bob," said Scrooge, with an earnestness that could not be mistaken as he clapped him on the back. "A Merry Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, that I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon." Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man, and as good Old City ever knew. And it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well. And may that be truly said of us and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone.
Have a holly jolly Christmas. It's the best time of the year. Now I don't know if there'll be snow, but have a cup of cheer. Have a holly jolly Christmas. And when you walk down the street, say hello to friends you know and everyone you meet. Oh, the mistletoe is somewhere you can see. Somebody waits for you. Kiss her once for me. Woo! Have a holly jolly Christmas. And in case you didn't hear, oh, by golly, have a holly jolly Christmas this year. Have a holly jolly Christmas. It's the best time of the year. Now I don't know if there'll be snow, but have a cup of cheer. Have a holly jolly Christmas. And when you walk down the street, say hello to friends you know and everyone you meet. Oh, the mistletoe is somewhere you can see. Somebody waits for you. Kiss her once for me. Have a holly jolly Christmas. And in case you didn't hear, oh, by golly, have a holly jolly Christmas this year. Christmas this year.
Thank you, James, and thank you all for coming tonight. And for those watching on the recording, please join me in giving thanks to Patricia for the idea. And the people that set up, so Brian and Reverend Thomas, and the readers to step up and to do that performance. That was a lot of reading. And for James, amazing once again. Yeah. So let's share our joy out there with a Merry Christmas, a Happy Holiday, Happy Hanukkah, whatever way you want to spread joy, love, and peace. Safe journey.